Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled BET meeting for October 2008. Call on the clerk for the non-routine applications.
Non-routine.
It's reversed a little bit, so why don't I first start with the budget review? We'll take the agenda up in order that it appears. So we'll start with PR1, Mason. Second by Mr. Simon, a report from the Budget Committee.
Good evening, fellow BET members and guests. PR1 is an additional appropriation to finally dredge Greenwich Harbor, what we call Grass Island. This is a non-routine item for several reasons. The first being this project has been in the works for almost a decade, waiting for permitting, and in recent time after we've discovered what the material that we had to remove some capping material for a portion of the dredge. The current appropriation on the books that has not lapsed is for $1.1 million, and we need the additional $647,000. This will allow full completion of the project. The interim would have been significantly higher. However, the department and the Board of Parks and Rec, I believe, has found some free capping material, which we'll be using. Our dirty contaminated material, I believe, will end up in Meriden, Connecticut. Our committee might not have approved this interim appropriation simply because what the impact would have been to the capital non-recurring fund. We've put out an open request to all of the appointing authorities in the town to control or eliminate spending in our current fiscal year. The Parks and Rec Department came to us with 3 projects that could be postponed for this year, of which 2 of them we accepted, that would release $250,000 back into the general fund. Although that's not a condition on the appropriation, it's just part of the explanation. We applauded their effort and approved this item 4-0 in favor of the interim.
Discussion on this issue. This issue is going before the RTM this month for approval. Mr. Kremick.
I would like to speak in support of this item. Grass Island is an important resource for the town, and because of the silting condition, it's becoming has become more and more useless, I suppose, because of the silting condition. This was one of the first matters I ever voted on in the BET when I was on the BET Budget Committee after first getting elected, and we were planning to do the dredging then. And because of various problems, we have not been able to do this project, and I think we have an opportunity now to do it, and it's a very useful and very important project. The only project, by the way, that I remember being longer in duration is turning Coscob Power Plant into a park. That still holds the record, but the dredging of Grass Island is something that needs to be done. It's been here for a long time, and I think I'd like to commend the Parks and Rec for coming up with a very valuable solution to what's been a knotty problem to get this project going forward.
Ms. Spartan.
I have some questions about this project. I'm not necessarily opposed to it and don't interpret my questions as opposition. I would like to understand better the benefits to the town of the dredging project other than freeing up some boat slips.
Excuse me. Good evening. The benefit to the town would be, as you mentioned, the boat slips, but also some mooring locations. It's to maintain the infrastructure, if you want to say, that we have. It's for recreational purposes. People in Greenwich have been enjoying recreational boating for a number of years. We're able to provide adequate facilities at Grass Island and other marinas that are not quite in the private sector facilities, but still affordable to town residents and others who choose to use that. So overall, it's for the benefit of the people who use the program. It does maintain our infrastructure of Grass Island. The last dredge that took place at Grass Island was in 1950, and there was a small portion of the Grass Island dredged in 75 when we put the fueling facility in, which no longer exists at Grass Island. So those are basically the primary reasons for doing this. We have not, these projects are designed for 25 years, and so we're looking at a life expectancy of dredging today and hopefully not having to do this for a 25-year period. Periodically through that next 25 years, we should be monitoring the siltation in Greenwich Harbor, the runoff that comes in, so that we have, about 15 years out, we need to start that process.
You mentioned the silting up of the harbor. Will this dredging project open up the harbor to traffic that can't currently penetrate the harbor?
Currently, the federal channel, which, if you can imagine Greenwich Harbor, where the ferry boat runs up and down the channel, that is federal water. And that is dredged by the Army Corps of Engineers. So as far as the main channel goes, it will not open up any traffic in the main channel. But in the mooring fields itself, at certain locations, we do have shoal or shallow areas, and it's at some tides it is difficult to navigate. If you're thinking about way up on the north side by the boys, the bridge, by where the thruway is, and as you're approaching the Boys and Girls Club there, we are not going to penetrate that far up. This will be around the dock area, out to the mid channel line, and so we'll be trying to create an access way, and not only that, we'll be trying to provide adequate space around the docks for boats and various slips.
Yeah, the reason for my questions is I'm not 100% convinced of the public benefit of this project, but I do understand the length of time that it's been pending and the various pieces of permissions that had to come together in sort of a perfect situation in order for you to be able to do it. So for the rather modest amount of money we're talking about, which is real money, but it isn't millions yet, I'm not inclined to oppose it, but I do have some reservations about the impact for the benefit of the public as opposed to a limited class of voters.
Okay.
Mr. Cislano, while you're at the podium or lectern, if you could comment on the amount of money that is being returned to the capital non-recurring account. I know that's not what we're taking action on, but I think is relevant to our decision-making here today. The total amount that you're seeking for the appropriation is $647,022, but some of that is being offset, correct?
That's correct.
And how much of that is being offset?
Well, there's 250 as of tonight, but at the Budget Committee meeting, we offered 300, which I assume has been changed because one of those projects is bonded for. That's correct. So the area the two areas that we are going to look at is currently in this year's appropriation, the 08-09 appropriation, we have $200,000 to do the plans and specifications for a new ferry boat. Obviously, we need to plan for a new ferry boat, and we need to execute those plans and specifications at some point. We've been talking with the U.S. Coast Guard about this, and they are on board. Currently, all of our boats have certificates to run for the next 18 months, and we have not started the process of seeking a marine engineer, architect, and starting the plans. Overall, with the price of goods and the materials, fluctuating so much, even if we were to have those plans and specifications today, we might want to think about what would it cost us to build a boat. We had anticipated $1.5 million, depending on where the steel market is, where the other material market is. It may be quite more substantial or less. It's just fluctuating all over the place. It will take us 18 months to build a boat once we get all of these approvals. So what we're electing to do is to take this money, use it towards the dredging of Grass Island, which is much needed and timely right now. And in the next CIP request year, which will be the 09-010, we'll request the $200,000 at that time, and we've done so. So that's one of the projects. The second one, because I'm not sure which one's bonded or which one's not. Roland, do you know which one?
The dock, 50,000.
The dock was bonded?
The two $50,000 ones.
Yeah, there was $50,000 for the Grass Island, a section of the Grass Island dock to be rebuilt. That's the new portion along the new ramp system that you see at Grass Island. There was 4 or 5 sections of docks, some new pile work that was there. We were able to achieve that work through our maintenance budget last year. We built the floats internally, and we had the piles driven, and we're able to. That project is completed, and we're able to return those funds back to the town without spending that appropriation. So that's $250. The third project, which is the dock rebuilding at the Coscob/Ferris dock. There's a significant 125 feet or more of seawall that needs to be restored there at the Ferris's dock. We know that price right now is about $300 a foot. We would need over $300,000 or close to $400,000 to do this project. We have $100,000. So what we're going to look to do is return 50, keep 50 to do the plan, specification, and engineering, and in future years come back and ask for the funding for that $400,000 project. So that's our plan, to place that money towards the Grass Island dredging program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Next item, PW1. We'll take them together with PW2. Mr. Mason, on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PW1 is a release of conditions for the Glenville Fire Station rehab of $225,000. It's an appropriation we've already approved, subject to release for a report back from Mr. Manelli on that project. And PW2 is an additional appropriation of $350,000 for the same project to bring the contingency level up to a number. I think we'll end up with about 18% if that's added to it. And the Budget Committee took those up Tuesday night, and I so moved those items.
It's been moved by Mr. Mason. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Mr. Mason.
As I said earlier, PW1 is a subject to release for the renovation of the Glenville Fire Station rehab. It's actually an increase in the footprint as well. This is approved if we release PW1, that would leave us in a position where we would have a remainder of $72,000 as the contract is currently bid for contingency on this project. As we've seen in the past, a lot of our projects have escalated. Our discussion on this item was obviously merged with PW2, along with a discussion about where project costs might be going now with the economic conditions that we're dealing with. Either way, we do not think that a $72,000 contingency is adequate on this type of project. PW2 that comes along, and initially it had offered a $500,000 appropriation. However, with discussions in the Budget Committee, we realized that $350,000 would be adequate, so we brought that number down to that, and you have an amended blue sheet. The discussion seemed to begin about the need and the cost. The Glenville House is not a new initiative. It's actually been on the hopper. It's part of our 10-year plan, which addresses the Central Fire Station. The Glenville Station becomes a house that supports Central Greenwich during the construction when we finish the police department building and so on. Our committee then discussed PW2 application. We again, due to the balance in the capital non-recurring, had asked, as I said in the last item, all of the appointing authorities what they might be able to do within this fiscal year to their current appropriations, whether it be operating or capital, to help us cover this. And with us was Chief Szynski from the fire department, who came and offered us, I believe the number was $200,000 on the nose for some projects that he's doing that would have been very late to get accomplished in this fiscal year. And again, I think his plan would be to resubmit those into, so instead of doing the projects maybe in April, May, or June, they'll become a priority. In the next year, he'll submit them in that. So that was a $200,000 that he had. Again, we applaud those efforts. We recommended the PW1 be released 4-0, and we recommended PW2 be approved at the $350,000 level 4-0 on both of those items.
Discussion. Mr. Kelly.
Al, other than cost escalation, if we delayed this project, what are the strategic implications? What are the reasons for going forward, and what would be the implications if we didn't go forward right now?
Well,
And either you or one of the...
in the building index that we keep up in BC&M, the fire stations are on a plan to be renovated. Glenville is the next one in line. We have previously completed North Street and Cos Cob. Along with that, we realized that as part of the central fire station rehab, we will not be able to house anybody in the building during that renovation, so those forces have to be redeployed. So as part of the Glenville apparatus bay addition, we've increased the height of the door so that it would take the Tower 1, so that the chief could then redeploy. He wouldn't be able to fit everybody in Glenville, but he'd be able to at least redeploy Tower 1 to Glenville.
Would Tower 1 fit anywhere else?
It would fit in the overhead at North Street, leaving 6 inches to the back wall, which is not adequate.
I don't know what you mean.
In other words, the length of the vehicle itself would leave 6 inches off the bumper to the back wall of the building.
And then the door
Then you could
close?
just about close the door with 6 inches in the front.
But that's the only place it would fit.
That's the only place it would fit, if you want to call that fitting.
Okay, so the reason the extra bay is being built at Glenville is to house that Tower 1?
No. The extra bays at Glenville were part of the plan that the chief submitted for making the fire station meet the fire department's needs. All we did to fit Tower 1 was increase the height.
All right. No, what I want to know is, right now, we're looking at all the capital projects.
I understand.
And we're sending messages with our guidelines. I think we need to look at all these projects as they come before us, especially ones that look for interim appropriations, and decide if they are necessary, can be delayed, or what are the implications. And that's the reason for my question. Okay, thanks.
Let me just try to clarify something, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Siciliano. There's a return, I think the number, though, is 250.
My mistake, it's 250, not 200.
That's being returned. Can you just comment on that so we have it for our record of the amount of what's being returned, or is that not in your?
You're going to have to ask the chief that question.
Why don't we take that up first, and then we'll. Good evening,
The
Chief.
return of $250,000 references the current allotment in the 0809 capital budget for dry hydrant installation, dry hydrants and cisterns. Those dry hydrants and cisterns are right now on tap for installation right around the May of 2009 date. As we discussed on Tuesday night, from an operational perspective, we will not suffer greatly if I move the installation date of those dry hydrants and cisterns till a July 1st date. They'll actually be up and running, ready to go, pending the funding. And if it helps move the Glenville renovation project to fruition, then it's certainly a decision that we would like to do in the fire department.
And that's for 250, correct?
250.
Okay. And just to make the point, because a lot of talk has transpired since the Budget Committee last week, would you say that the renovation of Glenville Fire Department is your number one capital priority currently?
The capital priority that we're looking at is the central station. In order to accomplish that central station from a strategic perspective, the Glenville Fire Station renovation becomes critical for that project.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Barton.
Chief, I think this question is more for you than for Al. There was reference made to adding an extra bay to the Glenville station, and what exactly is that for?
Well, that plan was actually designed prior to my arrival. Chief Warzoa certainly had a handle in that design. Some of what was included in that design work, and I'll certainly paraphrase the logic that I have heard since I've come in, is those two bays were added primarily because the existing bays and the construction type, and Al could speak to this better, of the existing fire station was not meant to carry the weight of new apparatus. So those new bays, in addition to one bay being larger to be able to keep that tower ladder in place, the new bays will be able to handle the weight sufficiently in that construction project. The operational concept of having those bays in place allows the 2 engines and the ladder to be put in place along with the utilities and the squads that Glenville currently has in place. There was some talk that we might be building a bay specifically to house the antique fire pumper that is there. That is not the reason why those 2 additional bays were designed, and Dan can certainly correct me if I'm going astray here. From an operational perspective, from the fire department's strategy is to try and keep those ladder trucks, those aerial ladders, as close to the downtown area that is possible. When we do finally vacate the Central Station building, it becomes imperative for us to keep ladder trucks on both sides of that downtown area so that if we did have a large fire in the central Greenwich area, Greenwich Avenue, we could still attack that fire in a pincer-type movement, moving a ladder truck that will have to relocate to Coscob along with a ladder truck coming in from the Glenville area. The concern that I have is if we start to shuffle an aerial ladder almost in concept of storage up to the North Street station, it becomes extremely difficult for me to get that pincer type attack on Greenwich Avenue. I'd have to utilize the ladder out of Sound Beach more often. And if I relocate that ladder out of Sound Beach to handle a vacancy in Central Station, the district of Sound Beach is unprotected as far as an aerial ladder is concerned. So it's such a complicated issue of operationally being able to cover our strategy and tactics for that downtown area. It's thought out with Plan A, B, and C's, and what it all comes back to make this process work the best is to get the linchpin in place and get the Glenville renovation done. Now, one thing that people are not considering, and I haven't heard talked, are some of the intangibles that are out there. This is a combination fire station, the Glenville station. It's a combination of career firefighters and volunteer firefighters as well. And this town is one that's prided itself on the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. The volunteer firefighters have been very much involved in this design process, probably given Al a couple of more gray hairs in that design. One of the things that becomes very difficult from a morale perspective is to deviate from a plan. This plan has been in this capital project for an extreme number of years. It's the first project moving forward of these renovated buildings that need to be done. If you were to pull the funding on this, which career and volunteer firefighters are expecting ground to be broken within a month and a half, that's how close this project is to moving forward. Morale suffers. From a recruitment and retention perspective, that hurts the volunteer force as well, and we have some members of the volunteer company here tonight. So from a recruitment and a retention and a morale status, we need to get these projects moving. Plain and simple. You know, show of hands, how many of you have walked through that Glenville Fire Station or Central Fire Station in the past year? How many of you are happy with what you saw?
Are you going to ask us about evolution? Because I'm ready for that.
I've been there. You know, I've got to tell you, I'm embarrassed at what these people are living in. These aren't fire stations. You have to look at these as homes. And people deserve better. And the town of Greenwich really deserves to provide a better quality of a building, a structure, so that we can meet the operational needs for the town.
Other questions? Mr. Manelli, I do have a question on timing and the sequencing of this. And then Mr. Kelly, I know, has a question.
I'd like to clarify one, too.
The release of the condition gets, once that condition is released, you can go out, you can sign the contract, because you have a contract that's already out, correct?
I have a bid that we can accept,
Okay.
yes.
And that's the, just so everybody's clear, that's the second time that you went out for bid on this project. The first time, you did some value engineering, you spoke with the chief, you talked with the volunteers, you came back with the bid that you currently have.
Right, in November of last year, we went out to bid with a 14,000 square foot renovation, and those bids came at 2.8, and then we went out to bid this past September, we reduced the square footage by 2,000, we're down to 12,008, and that came back at 2.775.
And the current fire station is about 8 and change?
8 and change.
Okay. you were planning on executing the contract after the release of the conditions, which does not require RTM approval, is that correct?
Right, because you guys are going to just release, if you do, you just release the money that's already been appropriated.
And PW2 is to allow yourself sufficient amount of contingency, or what you hope to have sufficient amount of contingency to complete the project. So you're avoiding the pattern where you're starting a project without adequate contingency to deal with what one could say was routine contingency amounts.
Right.
Okay. So if in fact this body pushes this off to November, the consequence of that would be you don't start the project as early as you would have, but the contract still remains?
We have a 120-day bid response on that contract. It's valid for.
So and that doesn't lapse until after the RTM meeting?
Right.
Okay. And you're going to go before the RTM for the 350 in December?
Yes.
One of the
There's
concerns...
there's no November meeting, right?
No November meeting. Right, okay. So one of the concerns, you heard it at the Budget Committee meeting, but then I think there's been further discussion about that amongst BET members. Certainly, we heard some of these comments by individual members of the Budget Overview Committee of the RTM, although they didn't take up the matter officially because it wasn't on their agenda, was that when this was rebid for the first time, oil prices were at record highs, and they have dropped significantly. Steel prices were at record highs. They've dropped considerably. And we heard the discussion last week that your feeling was it would still be more money if you went out and rebid, or at least you would get equal bids, not lower bids. Is that still your assessment now? And what would you say to looking at that and coming back in November?
Well, knowing that when we bid the first time, which was before the oil prices increased, we had to bid $99,000 more than we have today. The station was 2,000 square foot bigger than it was today. I reduced the square footage, and we basically got the same price. I also looked at all the bid responses. The average of the bid that we got this past September, the bid was averaging $3 million across all the bidders, and the number's pretty much the same from last year. One of the things that I understand that commodities are dropping, but you have to also understand that items for construction were being manufactured all summer long and are sitting in stockyards all over the country. It's going to take a while for those prices to be reflective in any bids. The other thing is, there's a couple things that we have to do as a public entity. Number one, prevailing wages. This is a prevailing wage job. Those wages are set by the State Department of Labor. So they're fixed for southern Fairfield County. I've never, in my entire career, have ever seen them be rolled back. They're always moving forward. The other thing is that we're 20% self-performing on this job. We want contractors that are responsive, that are multi-talented, that they could do the masonry, they can do the concrete work, they could do a lot of the aspects of this job without subcontracting everything out. It just gives the town more ability to control the contractor. There's not many contractors out there that can do this 20% deal. The 9 responsive bidders were. We've pretty much dealt with all those 9 over the course of my career here. I don't really see, or I don't think you'll see a dramatic drop in the prices if we went out for a rebid, whether we went out next month or in 6 months. I think we're just going to be right where we're at. I just wanted to clarify Mr. Kelly's question before. The Glenville Fire Station as it exists today is 3 bays.
Right.
2 of the bays are doubled up, and it's actually a suspended concrete slab. So they cannot, like the chief was mentioning, the fire trucks today are a lot heavier than they were in 1950. So the floor loading in the back of the station can't take the trucks right now, so they're forced to take a number of their apparatus away from Glenville. So they have smaller utility trucks, pickup trucks. And they have the ladder, and they have the engine. By adding the 2 bays, that allowed them to put the correct apparatus back in district.
Okay.
And all we did to allow the central plan to go forward was increase the height of the door. So it was always going to be 5 bays. All we did was take the new bays and made the doors higher.
So is that the only enlargement of that building? Would be that increase?
No, you have the 2 bays, and then the need for, there's a second addition, which that was part of our redesign from last year. We've created a meeting space for the volunteers in a second addition, off to the side of the municipal lot.
Right.
Because we cannot, there's not enough room on the second floor to house the career staff.
Let me ask the chief one question.
Sure.
Thanks. Chief, you just spoke about the volunteers. Do you rely upon the volunteers when you make the call-outs for a fire?
They're simultaneously dispatched.
All right, but do you rely on them to provide the number of entry-level tagged firefighters that have to respond to a scene?
Well, we rely on the volunteers very heavily.
So if you have a fire in Sound Beach right now,
Right.
will you just dispatch Sound Beach?
It's townwide dispatch, so all volunteer companies are notified.
Right, but what about the actual fire stations? Would COSCOB respond to Sound Beach as well
They may.
in order to get the right number of entry-tagged firefighters there?
In order to get an appropriate number of firefighters to respond.
All right, you need to have 4, right, to go into an active fire, 2 in, 2 out?
Depends on the situation. In an emergency rescue situation, you can enter with 2
Right.
without the appropriate backup. It compromises safety, but they can affect a rescue. But typically, the 2 in and 2 out rule does call for 4-person engine companies.
You'll have a multi-station response
Right.
for a fire.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Tarkington?
I have a question for Mr. Manelli. Is this new redeveloped fire station 12,800 feet or 14,800 feet?
It is 12,811.
Okay. So, using those numbers, whether it's on the, just the new space or the total space, the square footage numbers seem to be running about $270 a square foot to $765 a square foot. Is that pretty typical for fire stations, or is it the fact that it's a renovation and you have this cantilevering work, or?
Well, we're not repairing the floor. That's one of the reasons why the station is getting 2 bays, because there's just no way to do it. Might as well rip the station down and start over.
But
Actually,
the square foot
Actually, the
cost
square,
seems
we're looking at, I just did this a little while ago, I'm getting $216 a square foot. 2.7 on 12,800 is like $216 a square foot. if
I
do it.
added the contingency back since we were going to approve that, but.
Okay, I'm just basing it on the low bid, yeah.
So on the total square foot, so.
Right, it's 216, and when we went to bid last year, it was 195
On the larger plan.
on a larger plan.
Thank you.
Any other comment or discussion? Mr. Simon?
Yeah, but what, the condition for the release of the 225 was exactly what again, please?
It was acceptance and approval of a report
Showing the need for the
evidencing
fund?
need of the amount.
Okay,
Pretty close.
which they seem to have met. But from my point of view, I mean, we probably have no choice but to release the 225, but it would be foolish to start a project without an adequate contingency, and we've made that mistake before, and so I would be reluctant to do that. So I will vote for I will vote for both of these.
Other,
We'd all be reluctant to release it for 72,000.
other comments or discussion? Chief, I'm then going to ask you if you can just comment very briefly, or maybe it's for Al, I don't know which one, but for those in the audience and in the general public, as to why, I'm sure there's going to be comments as to why you could not house the ladder truck in, say, a makeshift tent or something while you're doing Central. I know, because I hear that all the time. Well, we'll stick it in a parking lot, put up a tent, and keep it there for the 2 years that you're running that apparatus out. So if you could just address that, because I know the questions come in all the time on that issue.
It's been the fire department's operating procedure that the trucks be heated, and that means if we have a makeshift shelter for an apparatus. We have to have lights. We have to meet the building code. We have to have heat. We have to have water. We have to have drainage. We have to, if it's not located near a dormitory, you'll have to have toilets. So you're basically building another building. What's interesting, when we first bid the Glenville Station last November, the chief was trying to redeploy the company to Rye Brook, which they couldn't do because of some IRS rule, which whacked out a whole lot of money here. We are going to, when this was bid just past September, we are going to build the project in stages, so the apparatus is going to be finished first. The contractor is required to get a TCO. The fire trucks will move into the new two-bay addition. The contractor will provide a temporary living trailer, quarters, and then he'll be allowed to renovate the existing station and build the second addition. That's complicated enough without having to build, this way we don't have to build basically another building just to be ripped down. A lot of people talk about the temporary shelter that was built when the volunteers built the barn down at where the Greenwich Adult Daycare is in Coscob. Besides the fact it had just temporary electric in it, it had no other services in it, and it was against the building code. We're not going to be able to house career staff in that and respond. I mean, every town has different requirements. Ours is what it is. We spend a lot of money on the apparatus, and it's got to go through zoning. It's got to be just built just like another building.
When's the completion date?
I believe the contractor on this job figured it would take 20 months to build.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? We'll take them separately, though, so the vote is clear. PW1, it's the release of conditions for the $225,000. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. PW2, discussion. Additional appropriation. Do you have discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
If I may on this, I think the concern has been obviously that with the economic conditions going on, that contractors might be more likely to be able to engage in doing work in the town, and that material costs may be down. It was a discussion item at the Budget Committee, and I don't think the answer is what we wanted to hear. We thought we might be able to gain some ground on some of these projects with these economic times. However, with that being said, I agree with Mr. Simon. I don't think we would be doing ourselves a service to enter this project without the proper contingency. And again, it's a capital project, so if Mr. Minnelli can do a relook on this in any way, shape, or form, if it's not spent, it still reverts back to the capital for future appropriations.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. Madam Clerk, routine application HD3, please.
Okay, HD3 from the Health Department, approval to use $9,567,000. I so move.
Second. Moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. We continue to have our agenda a little backwards here. Non-routine applications from the Law Committee. Before you begin, my understanding is that two of us have to recuse ourselves on this one.
That's why it's non-routine.
So I do know there was a discussion that the individuals actually leave the room while the discussion occurs. This is a non-routine item. Mr. Kremick.
As one of those individuals, I would propose that we just not participate in the discussion and abstain from voting.
Yeah, this would have been routine, but for the abstention, so I don't think it's a controversial item.
Let me ask the board, does anybody have an objection to both Mr. Krummick and
No.
me to remain here while the vote is taken? Okay. Ms. Bart?
Just so it's clear, the reason we're abstaining is that the individual involved is a client of our law firm. And so we're not going to participate in the discussion on this matter or the vote.
That being said, Ms. Barton? Report of the Law Committee.
This is SE 8, an additional appropriation for the settlement of a claim by Ms. Lester for $5,000. This is a routine personal injury case arising out of a fall in a pothole on a town street. It was approved by the Law Committee on September 16th, 2008 by a vote of 2-0. And I move this item.
Moved by Ms. Barton. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Tarkington. I do not believe the Budget Committee took this matter up.
No, it's below the Budget Committee's
Thank you, Kim.
threshold.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Abstain. 10-0-2, Mr. Krummick. And Mr. Walco abstaining.
So, do I refer to myself, to Mr. Walker? To the minutes you should.
Moving on to routine applications, really through the Law Committee. I'll ask the clerk, though, to read them as she normally would, and then ask Ms. Barton for any comments. So, Madam Clerk, if you could read the routine applications through the Law Committee.
Okay, the routine applications are SE 6, First Selectman, an additional appropriation for settlement, Utility Analysts LLC versus CCM Services, $65,000. SE 7, First Selectman, additional appropriation, settlement Valentine versus BOE, $17,500. SE 9, First Selectman, additional appropriation, settlement M. Santoro versus Town of Greenwich, $75,000. SE 10, First Selectman, additional appropriation, settlement claim of A. Fairclough, $7,500. And I so move.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Ms. Barton. Discussion?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, utility analyst, the first claim, which is recommended for settlement of $65,000, is a claim for damages for breach of contract. The claim was discussed at the October 14th Budget Committee meeting in executive session when most of the BET members were present, so the full discussion was had at that time. The settlement was approved by the Law Committee on September 16th by a vote of 2-0 and by the Budget Committee on October 14th by a vote of 4-0. The Valentine claim for $17,500 is a claim for damages arising out of a sexual assault of a student at Greenwich High School, allegedly followed by a pattern of harassment of the victim. This was approved by the Law Committee, the proposed settlement on September 16th by a vote of 2-0 and is below the Budget Committee threshold, so it was not reviewed there. Santoro versus the Town of Greenwich for $75,000 is a claim for damages for personal injury to a young special needs student at the summer program at a Greenwich elementary school. This claim was also discussed at the October 14th Budget Committee meeting in executive session with most BET members present and was discussed fully at that time. The settlement was approved by the Law Committee on October 8th, 2008 by a vote of 2-0 and by the Budget Committee on October 14th by a vote of 4-0. And last, the Fairclough claim for settlement of $7,500 is a routine case involving a 4-car chain reaction accident. The last car, number 4, was a town car being driven by a town employee on town business. The proposed settlement was approved by the Law Committee on September 16th, 2008 by a vote of 2-0.
Further discussion? All items have been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? And just to confirm through the comptroller, these all come out of the risk fund, correct? That vote is 12-0-0. We arrive at number 3 of our agenda, the assessor's report. Mr. Gortney, our town assessor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. With me this evening, sitting next to Mr. Shipman, I have my brother who is here from California. My son was married over the weekend, and he came out for the wedding.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, welcome.
You have my report. I'd be glad to answer any questions. We are finishing the work for the 2008 grand list at this time. We're very carefully watching what's happening in the financial and real estate markets, monitoring them and seeing what impact if it might have on real estate in our community. I've also included a copy of our operation plan for the year 2009-10, which I'd like to have your approval so that I can proceed with making my budget estimate for next year.
Ted, a couple of questions before we get to the operations plans, and I would ask everyone to first key in on the report, and then if there are any questions on the operations plan, to take that up in sequence. I note on the second page at the very top, your section 3, that discusses sales trends regarding the reval. Now, the BET has assigned Ms. Tarkington and Mr. Simon as the liaisons for the revaluation process. Will you be able to come back to us next month after meeting with them to discuss the reval and the sales trends?
Yes, I would hope to be able to report on that at our next meeting.
And you have a meeting scheduled with the special project team right now for
Yes.
before the next meeting? Okay. Also on page 3, section 8, we previously discussed giving us a presentation, electronic presentation, on what would be rolled out based on the contract and the your department figuring out what information is to be addressed, and you gave us examples last time. Are we looking to do that November, December? What's a better time to roll that out?
The system will be set to be in place on January 8th of this coming year. So the earliest time that we could give you a live demonstration will be at the January meeting.
Okay, so why don't we plan on that then, to do that now. With respect to the information, I do note that you have received no objections from any of the members of the BET with respect to that information. What is your deadline before you start putting this together to have that feedback, if there is any?
I'd like to hear as soon as possible if there are any questions that people have, certainly before the next meeting.
Okay. And if you can all recall, there's a lot of information that can be put in. Your department has already pared down or determined what you believe is important information to be provided, but there is a balance there, and that's what you're looking for in some direction from us, correct?
Yes, it is. We also retain the right to remove information in the future. In other words, once we put it forward, we can still amend it to remove information.
So it's possible that after we see it live,
Yes.
if in fact there's information on there that all of a sudden we look at and think that is inappropriate, to then make comment at that meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other comments relative to just the report, not the operations plans? Mr. Simon?
I have two questions on the litigation, on the 10 cases. Do you have those out separately as to how we did on those?
I have a report that I keep on all cases. In essence, just to summarize what I've said here, in the last year, we dealt with 71% of all of the outstanding cases. We had only dealt with 10% the prior year. This year, we dealt with 71%, so now we only have 19% remaining.
But on the 10 cases, I mean, it seems like, at least reading this, we're doing pretty well, or the stipulations are coming right in the middle between what we want and what the owners want?
Generally speaking, yes.
All right. Then I'd also like to know under item 7, what the town policy is that when someone transfers out of your department to fill a vacancy in another department, and we're not hiring people, how does your vacancy get filled?
I'm hoping that we could get a transfer from another in-town department, someone who would like to join the assessment office who's already employed in the town would be my greatest hope.
But does the town have I'm sort of asking the first selectman and the administrator what the policy is, so we just don't have 42 people changing jobs in order to fill a vacancy.
Each time that there is a vacancy or opening in a department, it goes before the town administrator and before me for review and justification to fill.
So this vacancy was in HR. This
Correct.
person filled the vacancy in HR.
The benefits technician position.
Right,
I
now
believe.
does this vacancy now go before the town administrator?
Yes.
Yes.
We've looked at this one. John has already reviewed it.
And do you have to approve the transfer? How do we prevent the whole thing
It's just,
cascading?
what we do is HR requests permission to post the position and begin the process either to open it for a transfer within the town or to recruit outside of the town. The request has come in. I've asked Steve and the controller to give me an opinion about whether the position needs to be replaced, and we're still in discussion.
I was going to save this for the officer's report, but I'll mention it here as it's appropriate. No. Bill Finger and I did meet with the assessor last week. We did discuss not only this topic of the vacancy, but also hours of operations and scheduling. We've asked the assessor to put together a report to be furnished at our November meeting. And we've even gone so far as asking the assessor to look back to I believe it was the 04-05 was the year before the major restructuring occurred. I know I'm generally in the right time frame. I don't know if it was 03, 04, 04, 05, or 05, 06, where we added some positions to the assessor's office in connection with Mr. Gwartney's predecessor in terms of developing an assessor's office that actually could do revals in-house. So we've asked him to go back there as far back as that year to look at all the whole table of organization. And so we expect that the full board be involved in these discussions because somewhat in conflict with filling this position is our own advice to the first selectman, which is to look at table of organizations and find deficiencies where possible. And in fact, we'll be discussing in the guidelines moving forward, but certainly in previous guidelines as well, is seeking efficiencies where they can be found in terms of reduction of headcount. So I think we need to take a look at our two departments internally. Here's an opportunity, potentially. Mr. Gwartney certainly has his opinion. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to first meet with Bill Finger, and I will meet with Ted, and then we'll come back and report in November. So that's where it stands with that particular position, as well as schedule and hours of operation.
Well, I should be going back to 98, 99, and 2000.
Okay. Questions on the report, not on the operations plan? Okay, Mr. Stone.
Ted, I note your comment on page 2, item 3 about the studies of sales trends being postponed. But can you give us any very preliminary information that you may have, anecdotally or otherwise, concerning sales with respect to prices, days on the market, et cetera, versus prior periods? This real estate area is obviously critical to our budgetary process. It's after all, the underpinning of, let's call it the engine of Greenwich's revenue stream. So I'm wondering, do you have anything that you'd feel comfortable with sharing with us at this time?
Well, what we know for sure is that the days on the real estate market have increased dramatically on selling houses. We've also noticed that houses that must be sold are being sold at perhaps a lower price than what the owners would like to have received for them. But we're also finding that there is some stability and that the prices are not dramatically at this point dropping, but that's what we're monitoring just to see what happens in the next few months.
You're saying the asking prices or the selling prices?
The selling prices. The asking prices are still fairly high.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Tarkington.
And I think then the other question is, are you keeping track of the foreclosures? I mean, are you keeping a log of that? What, is that remaining fairly stable now, or is that continuing to accelerate?
We are keeping a log of foreclosures. Thus far, there's only been about 5 foreclosures that have actually occurred, so it hasn't become a major issue yet. But we are watching it. Many transactions are made before a potential foreclosure would ensue.
Other comments on the report? Turning to the operations plan. We'll do it together. Ted, I had a question. Primarily, most of my questions deal with the sections or the subsections within each sections regarding risk. So, for instance, in section 5A1, I guess, at the bottom of the page, it says a potential risk is finding that our consultants lack sufficient staff or expertise to fulfill their contractual obligations, which begs the question, why would we enter into a contract with one who doesn't have sufficient staff or expertise?
They have both, and that is not really a likely risk to be realized, but at least it's put out as if you have a risk, that would be what the risk would be. But we're not looking at that as being a realistic risk.
Okay. It's hard to say. So 2 pages later in section 5B1, looking at risk again, time risk is that there will be a problem with software used to produce either valuations or the actual grand list. Do you foresee it right now that there are any risks associated with that?
No, we don't.
Further down on that page in item 2, under risk, it says the primary risk is that the appraisers do not complete their work by the end of the year deadline. Do you mean the in-house appraisers or do you mean the external appraisers?
These are the in-house appraisers.
Which you have control over?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that you're going to need to hire temporary hires to alleviate this risk?
We may well need to. This year, we did have some temporary hires right at the last minute to assist. May well be necessary next year.
Do you think your current budget prior to July 1st can support the hiring of these temporary?
Yes, it can.
A couple pages later on 5BA1, it's special projects to be completed. Talking about the resolving remaining superior cases and assessment appeals by July of 2010. Are you talking about all appeals?
Yes.
And do you think that's a realistic goal?
Definitely, yes. We may well be able to finish them well before that date.
I have no other questions on the operations plans. Don't forget, these are part of what not only the BET has requested. I know the BOC in prior years has spent a lot of time in working on these operations plans and getting them together. So we now act as the body who is formulating them to then turn over to us later on and to the RTM. So other questions or comments on these operations plans by the assessor's office? Okay, can I have a motion to accept the report, which includes the operations plans then for the assessor's department?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Finger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Thank
you.
you very much. Moving to the BET Committee and Special Project Teams report. The reports are before you. If there are any questions pertaining to any of the reports, I'm just going to run through the list so that we can keep in order so that we're not jumping around. Audit, Investment Advisory, Human Resources, Nathaniel Witherell, Town Building Committee report, OPEB Trust, and Havemeyer Old Town Hall Project report. Any questions on that? No? Just for Mr. Stone on the Havemeyer Old Town Hall project report, I think Ms. Barton also serves on that committee with you as well. So has everyone seen the Phase 1 Board of Ed, the Geddes partnership for the space requirements? Was that circulated to all the BET members? No. So we should probably get all BET members a copy of that report, if we could. Oh, there's Ms. Wallerstein. She moved. This is the most current report provided by the Geddes Partnership to determine space requirements for the Board of Education. So it's the report that they're now working off of to go into the Phase 2 as to possible central office sites. Mr. Finger, follow up to that?
Just following up with what Mr. Simon just mentioned, it was my understanding that we were going to receive a copy of the study that Al Manelli did on the Havemeyer building for the senior center?
That is correct. I don't think we've received that either.
No, we have not.
So if we can get a copy of both of those reports. Okay. Preferably electronically. Well, here's a dilemma. I'll ask the body now. I try to be somewhat thrifty in sending out packages via courier on some of these reports as we go out, and I know and a lot of people tend to be in town hall. So normally, what I ask finance to do is if we're having a meeting or whatever, like for instance, they might bring them to the RTM meeting on Monday and hand them out to as many people as attend the RTM meetings. Why don't we start there, see how many need to get, and then maybe even just mail them out then, as opposed to personal courier. Okay. So we'll first wait to see if you see anybody between now and the RTM meeting, and then if not, if you can mail the remaining out, that would be fine.
Can you do it electronically?
If it's there. You could, and electronically if you have it. But I agree, it could get some of these reports. I know the Geddes is not that voluminous, from my recollection. Okay. Any other discussion on this point? Any other questions or comments on the special project team reports? Okay. Comptroller's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. Before I start the Comptroller's report, have a quick question on the process. I understand last November that it was between Peter being elected and Mr. Stone being appointed or elected, however the process is the chairman. The process last year, and I don't have a operational plan for tonight, the process last year was that it was voted on in November. And my department's operations plan, I met with Leslie Tarkenton and Nancy Barton, an extended meeting in my office, if you do recall, and then they gave a report to the full BET. Has that process changed?
That would be fine. Do you still intend to meet with Ms. Barton and Ms. Tarkington?
There's a new chairman, there's new assignments, you have special projects. However, whatever you wish, I could have the.
We'll figure that out before next meeting, so that we can get that operations plan before us. The deadline to submit it to the first selectman is December 1st. I think that's okay. So we still have some time, and we'll deal with it accordingly.
Thank you. The controller's report, there's a new addition. There's a monthly report called the Tax Collection Review Analysis at the original request of Mr. Finger, and then the BET supported it because of the financial conditions that we're experiencing. This will be a monthly report until we can gather enough information from it to determine whether or not it has value. 2 points I would like to make is it's only got 3 months, and it's got 2 prior years for comparison basis. And point number 1 is the collections for July. A lot has happened subsequent to that. So a lot of the ability to pay or not pay has worsened since the July period. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the tax collector's office trying to analyze trends on why people might not pay. Do they pay twice, 2 payments in advance previously, and now they don't? Is there a lot of houses out there that haven't been sold and the contractors are slow in paying, or the owners of the house? So we've collectively decided between the tax collector's office and finance that what we really need here, and I'll continue to produce this report, is we need the January collection period, and then we can do a full analysis of the value of this report. But in the meantime, I'll continue submitting this, and this report and the regular controller's report, I'll answer any questions at this time.
I have one comment on that. You might want to do the converse and show, instead of tax collection, shows delinquencies. I mean, I think that's what the board is really interested in, is how many dollars are delinquent at any point in time. And that's hard to tell from this report. And that would be the indicator of whether or not we're slowing down.
To answer, just to follow up to that, if you go to the report, you can see where you have the 3 estimated levies, which are reduced to take into account the uncollectible portion. We go, I think, at 98.35% collection rate. Plus, you've got the offset for the elderly credit, the state and the town program, and the tax settlements, which you see in the mill rate calculation. But if you just simply subtract the 145 from the 267, you do have a dollar amount. So I think what you're asking, and this is more of a question, is do you want another column that would show the delinquencies at that point in time?
I would argue, when I look here on this page B, that we actually set a mill rate to collect $271,948,456. That's what we expected to come in, less the, I want to just make sure I'm right. Or we expected to collect, I guess.
We expected to collect $267 million, factoring in the loss from the golf course litigation.
I would argue.
When we set the mill rate, we set it expecting to collect $268 million.
Sort of. But we said of that amount, 1.7 million would be delinquent. Did we not send out $271.948 million worth of tax bills minus the golf course?
Are you getting from the mill rate calculation?
Yes.
That would be grossed up. You'd have to subtract the uncollectible. That's the.
Well, but the uncollectible is going to be showing up here in the delinquent. You're not using the right number for what we should be collecting, I would argue.
Which number, Larry?
You're using what our net number is, 268 after a non-collectible number.
That's the amount we need to collect to balance the budget. As for comparison purposes, I used it consistently for all 3 years.
at a separate time, we could perhaps discuss this, but I think our focusing on delinquencies is a better focus.
Okay.
I had another question on the report, which is on paragraph 3 on page 1. I'll leave paragraph 1 for my friend, Mr. Norton. Our experience with Munis continues not to be very positive when they write custom software for us. Our retirement administration system is unique, and dealing with their company, I can never imagine being productive. So I would hope you would not spend a lot of time with them.
Actually, you made that comment previously, and I forwarded that comment to Mr. Lavin. And although he somewhat agreed, I think he's limited by the town's policies on which softwares he can and cannot go out and get.
The town's policy?
Well, it would be Boris Huderin, who decides whether or not he can go outside the Munis application and get additional software, which is how we got into the situation.
I'd suggest, when you see your friend in the back row there, that you clarify the town's IT policy as to what software we can get. I mean, really, I have no other questions.
I suggest it also might be an appropriate question for our IT special project team to look at that issue.
Perfect.
Other questions, comments on the report? Mr. Norton.
The only comment I like to make is addressing the year-end tax audit. It is our intention to be able to present to the full board at the December meeting approval of the fiscal 2008 audit. And at this point, we're on schedule to have that done. We're expecting at the audit committee in November to receive a draft of the management letter and the financials.
Other questions? All those in favor to accept the comptroller's report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Moved by Mr. Raymer, second by Mr. Norton. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Motion to accept the treasurer's report. Moved by Mr. Norton. Second by Mr. Finger. Questions, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. Mr. Norton and then Mr. Finger. Approval of BET minutes for September 16th, 2008. Moved by Mr. Simon. Second by Mr. Raymer. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. It's not on our agenda, but just to note, you should have received the quarterly summary of employee health care costs from Ms. Cast. In the future, obviously, if there are questions pertaining to that report, if you get them to us, then we can ensure that Ms. Cast is present to answer those questions.
This report comes out monthly. It just didn't come out monthly until now because of the fact that there was too many Board of Ed's ins and out during the summer.
Right.
I just don't want people to think it's a quarterly report, especially the HR department.
Moving on to the officer's report, one of the things that I think needs to be noted and that we should be proud of is Roland Geiger is displayed out there in the little presentation there for misspelled, yes, Manager of the Year. Certainly everyone on the BET has known for a long time what you bring and how much you do for us, not only during budget time, but throughout the year. So it's certainly nice that not only is the finance department recognized, but also that you're recognized. And so we applaud you for your hard work. as I indicated earlier, Bill Finger and I did meet with the assessor. We also met with the comptroller and went over a variety of topics, one of which deals with Nathaniel Witherell, and I have two comments relating to Nathaniel Witherell. One is, if you recall, in the current fiscal year, we budgeted money to perform a review or an audit, if you would like to call it that, of the operations plan of Nathaniel Witherell. Nathaniel Witherell is looking to revisit that operations plan based on current experience. So we're trying to see if there's any synergy there in terms of what they need and what we're looking for. We've asked Finance Department to see what contractors are out there that can perform this type of work. They are doing so, and keep you posted as to what we're able to do, not only internally, but if we're able to assist Nathaniel Witherell in some of the work that they're doing. Also, as you all know, there was a discussion regarding Nathaniel Witherell in connection with the creation of a revolving fund. Obviously, Finance Department will assist Nathaniel Witherell in any way that they can in making sure that a presentation is provided to us at some subsequent meeting concerning a revolving fund with specifics and the like. So we look forward to that. You should also be aware that Mike Mason and I attended the BOC meeting this past week, and once again, I note their chairman's presence, Mr. Petroselli. Good evening. Once again, this is in connection with an ongoing mission or goal of ours, and that's to increase communication between our bodies. And certainly the BOC has a lot of views on not only this year's budget, but they're taking the approach that in order to effectuate change and to make a difference, they're not only looking at the budgets when they come in May, but what can they do now to effectuate change in the budget process. You all know Mary Ferry and Fred Baker. I think Fred is a member of that committee. I'm not sure if Mary is or an alternate, but the sense of the meeting resolution that was put forward a couple of months ago is now going before the RTM with our comments. The BOC has also been instrumental. As of late, they have someone looking at the store management control process and potential projects down the line, as well as looking at debt level and then just overall budget review process. It was a healthy discussion this past Thursday, and I believe that Mr. Petroselli is going to make some comments on behalf of the BOC to the RTM regarding some of the discussions that have already taken place with respect to next year's budget and budget process. In my capacity as chairman, member of the Ham Ave Building Committee, we have been meeting weekly still. It really boils down to two issues: balancing and the garage. There are two issues with the garage: a fan in the lower level and the top slab and a breach of the waterproof membrane. I will add that Mr. Raymer has been in attendance of the last several meetings. Anybody else who cares to join us at 7:30 on, I think it's now switched to Thursdays, certainly can. When we say things like the building is complete, it really is, except for those two major items. They're now even working on punch lists, and that's how far along we are. The major issue is this balancing. The balancer and the engineer are going to be at the facility tomorrow. Excuse me. For a third round of attempts at trying to correct the balancing issues. On that note, Mr. Stone, do you have any comments? Ms. Tarkington?
I should comment here that there has been an amendment to the state's Freedom of Information Act during the special June legislative session, and that requires this board or any of the town boards or commissions to post within 7 days of their meeting their minutes, for public inspection on the town's website. So that will cause us to really quickly expedite the minutes. Maria and I are going to work hard on that so that they can be posted within 7 days. Wayne Fox has recommended that the minutes be shortened, and also that we mark the minutes subject to approval on every page. And we've sort of selected to do it by watermark. And then the minutes obviously be circulated in our normal process with any additional comments to be made by the various board members, and they'll be approved at the board meeting, and they will be reposted at the time that they're approved. This has turned out to be something that the governor's office apparently had put forward, not the Freedom of Information Commission. And so I think Wayne Fox thought that this might actually, there might be some changes in this legislation, perhaps even being reversed in early 2009. But in the meantime, we have a change process, and we'll be working with you over the next week or so. Thank you.
Moving on, old business. We're now up to Section 9 of our agenda, discussion of BET budget guidelines, fiscal year 9-10. I will turn it over to Mr. Mason, Chair of the Budget Committee.
Well, we are, the process is, as forward has been, the budget guidelines were normally due out in September. This year, we had made the decision to move the budget guideline approval to October, which is our this evening meeting. Over the course of the summer, solicitation was out for input on the budget guidelines, met with several of the different insurance groups, risk management, with the controller and the budget director all summer. We had budget guidelines framed up early September for approval. We then chose to have a workshop, which was, as you remember, one of the first times that the Budget Committee had done that. And we received input on the guidelines from different members and proceeded to make changes. Well, from the time that happened, we've had some big changes in the economic conditions, not only in the United States, probably the whole world. We had been making adjustments to reduce revenue, to make assumptions on potential building permit revenue going down, conveyance tax revenue going down, making assumption what we thought the grand list would be. And we put that into a final document, which we took to the Budget Committee last Tuesday evening. And quite frankly, last Tuesday evening, the basic concern that came out was everything that's going on, and which led into a lengthy discussion, which led into how many special meetings? We had 2 additional special meetings on that. The consensus, as I see it in the current, is there seems to be consensus in the budget guidelines. Everybody has concerns with revenues and some of the, obviously, capital planning. There have been some decisions made prior to that to rearrange a couple capital projects and to just, the overall look at the budget. It came down to a suggestion that the guidelines, we would not be able to address everybody's presumptions of where we might find ourselves in February, nor did it seem like we wanted to make those decisions of February now. So the idea had come up with a preamble. So what you have in front of you is, and I'll explain how it came to you. You have a preamble, which was a separate vote of the Budget Committee. And you have, starting on page 2, where it says guidelines and guidance from the BET. I will say if there hasn't been 150 emails on this, there hasn't been one. I can't thank Mr. Simon, every member, everybody is, Ms. Tarkington, Mr. Stone. Everybody's really put the work into it. But where we stand right as we speak, Mr. Chairman, is the document in front of you from the Budget Committee that starts guidelines and guidance from the BET was approved just tonight before our caucus is 310. The discussion at our this evening meeting went to a preamble, and the preamble that's attached with what Roland, because we even made some more changes tonight, that's in front of you right now, was passed 3-10. There was another version, which I'm sure Mr. Stone will probably offer, which is a paragraph. The The discussions are, what we really tried to focus on from a budget committee point of view is the guidelines are the guidelines and the preamble is the cautionary warning. The guidelines should give direction, where the town should be going and things that should be considered. And the preamble is the warning that, look, the things that have gone down in our country in the last 3 or 4 weeks could cause significant changes and who knows where come decision time in February. So with that, the Budget Committee presents this to you for full board's deliberations. I will make note that I think as a comment on the process more than the what we call the meat and potatoes, the guidelines in September, had we been doing this now, we would be here tonight with doing the same preamble again. We would be sitting here saying, look, the guidelines that we approved in September, we need to really be cautious of the things that are happening. So I think we'll obviously revisit the process next year and continue forward. But other than that, I mean, there is a significant amount. I cannot thank the controller, budget director. I mean, it's been nonstop work on this. And to all the department heads and the appointing authorities, it's a very difficult time, and we're going to have to make some big decisions come February and March when we're making our final budget decisions. Thank you.
Just talking about process, because I know everyone, at least sitting up here, has been keenly aware of the conversation that has taken place electronically through emails, and then even the special meeting. I know many attended both this evening and last Thursday, and then going back to the full Budget Committee meeting last Tuesday. What I'd like to do is, you have the document in front of you that has been proposed by the Budget Committee. What I'd like to do is take any amendments, any and all amendments prior to, and then we would vote on deliberate on any amendments that might be made. Should they all fail, then it's just simply the document that's before you. If they pass, then it is the amended version that we would be voting on. And I think we can proceed then in an orderly fashion and deal with the amendments only, so we're not deliberating the entire document, but any specific amendment that might be offered. Once again, if there are no amendments, then we would simply just take this matter up and take it up accordingly. Ms. Tarkington?
I'd just like to make a comment about how hard the Budget Committee has worked on this. And, I think we have different ideas and suggestions, but they've been very receptive to suggestions and have made substantial changes in the document as a result of the input. And I think this has, been difficult for the Budget Committee, who also worked very hard this summer and didn't expect the financial and economic changes that have happened, in the U.S. or globally. And they've worked very hard and very well with the other members of the BET.
Okay. Mr. Finger?
I think the process worked quite well here. Obviously, there were was a lot of input from members of the entire BET. And I do want to commend the Budget Committee for seeing the wisdom in including a preamble, because the preamble does set the tone for many of the comments that they did receive. I know I had a number of comments with regard to revenue, and the preamble really does take care of a lot of those issues. And I think at the end of the day, the guidelines as presented here serve as a good path for the various departments to follow in coming up with their budget.
Thank you. Mr. Stone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe certainly the full board was at Tuesday night's meeting where I may have started this dialogue off, and just reviewing the bidding a little bit for the record and also for those who may not have been there. I stated at the time, at that point in time, and still tonight, that I remain quite concerned about the the situation that will be affecting the region and the town, and that in view of that, the guidelines as presented last Tuesday clearly sent a message that that I felt was not fair to basically to citizenry in Greenwich, which one way or the other gets wind of our guidelines. It's become a bit more of a public document than it was originally. So it's not simply a message to town departments and the Board of Ed. And I felt then, and I still feel, that we know enough now, even though there's a proper concentration on the fact that there's a great deal of uncertainty, and that it's undoubted that even between now and February, conditions will quite likely be changing. But we do know enough now to be able to make some determinations as to where we'll be in February, and I dare say in May, when the budget is going to be even voted on by the RTM. And in view of what we know, and in view of the situation, I felt it was incumbent on us to be a bit more transparent, to be a little bit clearer in the message. That transparency could have found its way to the body, what I'll call the body of the guidelines. In fact, there were some changes that were made in the body of the guidelines along the lines of some suggestions that I made and that a number of you all have made to basically adjust thinking to that of the current situation. One of which I'm happy to say relates to an expected reduction in the town's table of organization, something that I've been interested in doing for a period of time, and particularly because it relates to the fundamental issue, and that is the town's operational expenses. However, in addition to those changes that were made, the idea then surfaced about developing basically a preamble, which has then, since that time, become the subject of a good deal of discussion, deliberation, and I think a lot of very good thinking has gone into it. We've struggled. A good number of us have exchanged ideas, and I think a fairly good document was arrived at, not quite far enough as far as I personally am concerned, but possibly far enough as far as many others, and I believe certainly as far as the balance of the budget committees, and that resulted in a vote of 3-1 in favor of what I'll call an inadequate preamble. So I'm proposing now, and I've adjusted my let's call it my suggested insert a bit. I've discussed it with a number of my colleagues, but not enough to represent a majority at this stage. I think it just is something I'd like to throw out to see if there's a way of saving the day and coming up with a bit with something that's unanimous. And for that reason, I'd like, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, to read an adjusted insert to the board. And this, I believe, is one that the board probably has the original insert, which started off with the words "importantly in order to further reduce," etc.
So in prior documents, my understanding is relating to the italics paragraph contained in a previous version of the preamble.
Right, correct. So what I've done now is, with some suggestions, further reduce that. I think leaving in the essence of what it was that I wanted to get across and what I still feel is vital as far as I personally am concerned. And it would read the following way. And this would follow the second paragraph, which ends with the word detailed. To further reduce the amount required from the capital markets and to achieve a goal of containing property tax increases to a targeted 2 to 4%, capital spending may be limited to projects having a clear bearing on maintenance, health, and/or safety.
And you're so moving now?
I am so moving that wording be considered as an insert, in effect, a paragraph standing alone, following the prior paragraph, which ends in the word detailed.
Ends in the word detailed or detailed below, as detailed below?
Well, the one I have says detailed.
I think it says as detailed below.
Detailed
After the
below.
second
That's fine.
paragraph of the preamble.
Correct.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Stone. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion on Mr. Stone's amendment.
Is this the only amendment we're having? This is the end of the amendments?
That's correct.
I mean,
Well, no, as I have laid this out, the way I envision this process working, and I would hope, and as you all know, and have commented to me, I won't say privately, but in terms of trying not to particularly wordsmith at these meetings, it's never really that useful of a procedure. But I would hope that what we do is we take these amendments, if this is the only one or if there are others, but we take them as independent votes. We then come to what is an amended or not an amended guidelines as proposed by the Budget Committee, and then take them up individually and then ultimately arrive at the guidelines as amended. So Mr. Stone has made this amendment. We will take this item up. It will either pass or fail. If there are other amendments, we will take them up, whether in the body of the guidelines or in the preamble, and then we will complete our discussion in terms of a vote for the guidelines. With that, Mr. Krummick.
I don't support this amendment. I think that there's always a tension when we're dealing with the guidelines. There's a tendency sometimes to go beyond a guideline and to prejudge what we're going to do. And I think that this goes beyond a guideline. I know it's couched in qualified language. We may do this, but clearly it's intended to signal priority for these items. And I've got to tell you, we've done this in the past, and there, quite a few years ago, the BET did try to prioritize capital spending in using similar language. And the problem was that items that are very important to the town, like, for example, education items, that did not fall into the category of health or safety, were slighted. And in order to get around this, in order to solve this problem, we set up the CIP process so that all capital projects could be looked at in context. And I don't think that it's a good idea in our preamble to our proposal to suggest that this is what we're going to do. I think we should wait. I think we should. Our process is such that we will have an opportunity to revisit this after the CIP process has worked, in order to determine, based on then available information of revenues and other factors, what we're going to recommend. And I think that that this is not an appropriate thing to put into the guidelines at this point.
Mr. Simon?
Yes, I also oppose this for two reasons. One, it makes an assumption that we're reducing the amount required today as opposed to letting the Budget Committee make this decision in February, which is, I think, the appropriate time. It prejudges the situation, and he may know or he may not know, but I don't want to give up my right to vote on this issue in February, and I don't think you want to give up your right to vote on this issue in March by prejudging this. And two, as Mr. Stone said in our earlier meetings, he's essentially taking the priorities of the capital program or the CIP process and imposing new rankings on them. I'm very pleased with where we've come in the 8 years that we've had a capital project. I'd like to see the first selectman and the other members of the CIP process go through their own ranking of the projects. And if it turns out that they vote on projects that are not always maintenance, health, and safety, I think we can have a healthy discussion as to where those fit in. But I don't think we should short-circuit that process, and I think I would like to continue all the important work that we've done over the last 8 years and not stop it today. And therefore, I oppose this.
Mr. Mason.
Obviously, the language that's suggested draft revision before you is just that, it's language. The lead up into this language has been extensive. I would like to say I probably, at least from my side aisle, I probably don't have the support, but I will say this. The guidelines are that when the idea of a preamble came up, it was not to be a guideline. It was to be the caution statement. It was to be, look, we've been working on guidelines, we've built them up, and now some things have changed. And obviously, to Mr. Stone's credit, I think the last week of conversations probably around the town, especially through the appointing authorities, has been guidelines and what's going on and what are we doing and what are they, how are they going to start handling these things. Steve mentioned that we attended a meeting of the Budget Overview Committee. We got asked the same questions. What are we doing? However, I do not want, what I think Mr. Simon is trying to say is, I do not want to send the message now that if February, the presumptions that we all seem to have are true, that it's going to be capital. It could be operating. It could be fixed charge. It could be programming. We have no idea what it could be, but we don't want to make that decision now. And certainly, even from one of our meetings, and I'm going to quote Mr. Minarski, if I may, you certainly don't want to send that message now and have the departments that we've worked on a 5-year, went to 10, went to 15 years, start slowing down a capital improvement plan. We've put that in motion. We want to keep that going. Obviously, yes, we may have a dollar threshold. We may have to draw the line, and that's our job. But the other thing, too, is the statement in there about health and safety. What about public-private property partnerships? What would happen if Western Greenwich Civic Center came along right now? We wouldn't have under that paragraph that we're going to do that. We wouldn't have Western Greenwich Civic Center. What do we do? There's no recognition if a capital project comes along with funding there. How do we address that? And I think we're sending a message in a preamble, which is not the place. The only message in that preamble should be caution, be advised, we have to take some necessary steps. So with that, I would hope that we would approve the preamble that we have submitted tonight and move forward from there. The best part about the budget guidelines is that we're already being proactive in the current budget. And that's what we need to do. We need to get past the guidelines and be as proactive as we can in our current day-to-day operation by trying to find what comes back and work on increasing our fund balance for the end of this fiscal year. So that's my position on it, and I thank you.
I'll get to you, Mr. Stone, in a second. Any other comments? Ms. Tarkington, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just, I think one of the things that Mr. Stone has said here is that, or as we know, Mr. Stone is our person on the CIP committee from the BET. And in one of these workshop sessions, he did say that he would like the guidance from the BET. So I think from that standpoint, perhaps this offers him some guidance. It also doesn't say this is going to happen, but it says, perhaps we may have to reduce the amount and spending may be limited to projects. So, it's guidance, but I don't think it's quite as definitive as some of my colleagues here have commented. But I think
Mr. Finger?
I'm opposed to adding this language. I think it is more than guidance. It may be intended by some to be guidance, but I think the effect of it would be to create a chilling effect for the CIP process, and that's not something that we want to do. I don't think we want to do that. And I think it would be a huge mistake to include this type of language in the preamble and have this go forward to the members of the CIP who are involved in the CIP process. I just think the chilling effect would be too great.
Any other comments? Okay, before, Mr. Stone, why don't you? Go ahead, Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe for a second that this would have a chilling effect. The CIP process essentially has already started. The projects that were going to be submitted are, I believe, either in interoffice mail or about to be. I think it would be fair for not just people in the town departments and the Board of Ed, but most importantly, and that is the citizenry, to send out a signal that that we get it. The original, and again, I think we've come a long way. I don't mean to minimize the changes that have taken place since last Tuesday and since I first made those comments. However, I think we're still, quote, pulling our punches a bit, since we really know now, at least I know, and I believe several of you and maybe all of you know, that at the end of the day, we're going to be well advised, if we act prudently, we're going to be well advised to reduce to the degree possible those expenditures that are going to be made by the town. Now, one area that I don't want to reduce by one dime would be those capital expenditures that are, as far as I'm concerned, critical, and those are specifically maintenance, health, and safety. And I believe, from having sat in on the CIP committee deliberations, they also place the highest priorities on those particular 3 items among the total of 13. So this would simply be letting them know that this is what the BET expects may happen as a result of a situation which is already developed. We're not. I don't think we're speculating to a great degree about what might happen between now and February. It's already happened. We're basically being just a bit clearer as to what our take is on what we believe we might have to do as a result of what has already taken place. Thank you.
Any other comment?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr.
Yes, I'd like to reiterate some of what my colleague, Mr. Stone, has just indicated. I think this does not in any way impede the CIP process, and I'm not in favor of impeding that in any way. And I believe that the current CIP process is just about complete, in which submissions, I believe, are due this week. However, what I think this does is give to the Budget Committee greater flexibility when it's forced to make its decisions in February in regard to the capital items and the conditions that will exist at that time in the capital markets. And for that reason, I think the added flexibility which we are indicating to the Budget Committee to have, and in effect to this full board to have going forward, are very beneficial, and I support them.
Mr. Simon?
Yeah, I think the Budget Committee has ultimate flexibility and can choose whatever it wants to do. I mean, it has to approve a budget that's passed by the BET. This reduces the Budget Committee's flexibility by us presuming to further reduce the amount required from the capital markets. And the Budget Committee hasn't made that decision and hasn't evaluated the financing model. It has a financing model which is already included in the budget guidelines, and I would argue this just constrains the Budget Committee's ability to make decisions.
Mr. Kremick?
I'm not sure it constrains it, but it communicates to the people that receive this that the Budget Committee and the BET are operating under constraints or with a view that we're really not operating under, that we're retaining our flexibility to react and to observe and to defer until we further in the budget process some of these issues that are raised in the guidelines.
Okay. With respect to this amendment, I do note on page 7 that we do discuss, to some degree, prioritization of capital projects. We do, in fact, state in the second full paragraph, the BET continues to emphasize completing ongoing initiative and maintaining our existing infrastructure before starting new initiatives. I would argue that that, in fact, is a restriction placed on the CIP committee by the Budget Committee. In this next paragraph, it also says a maintenance plan for all new buildings continues to be a requirement for this year's CIP process, once again highlighting maintenance, which I think has been, certainly in budget statements, that the maintaining of our infrastructure, bringing it up to an acceptable level, is in fact one of the cornerstones of our recent capital budgets. I am actually very proud of the discussion that has taken place amongst all BET members relative to this. The fact that we're discussing one paragraph in a 9-page document relating to budget guidelines, I think, is commendable. The fact that we're discussing whether or not in one preamble, a 2-line sentence or paragraph dealing with whether or not it sends too strong of a message for some, too weak of a message for others, I think is commendable, and the citizens of this town should appreciate and hold dear the fact that we do have such high-level discussions about their money and about how it's being used. And so whether the vote is for this amendment or against it or any other amendments that come forward, I think it shows the strength of the BET and certainly not its weakness. To that extent, I think this paragraph has been, I'll say watered down, but of such a nature where I don't personally believe it'll have a chilling effect. I think we give guidance to the CIP committee anyway. I don't think it would materially change it. The BET has no vote on the CIP committee, and really that vote comes in the form of the Budget Committee and all 4 members who serve on that committee. And to that extent, although I appreciate all the comments made against it and for the reasons why, and I agree with many of them, I also believe that it just further clarifies and expands upon what the preamble has set out to do, and that's just simply to say, listen, times are volatile, and everything that is in the guidelines is our best guess as to what is going to happen and what we're going to be constrained with in February and then May, and that we need to take a harder look at it yet again. That said, I will call for a vote. All those in favor, just so everyone's clear about what we're voting on the amendment by Mr. Stone, second by Ms. Tarkington. It is the language that is slightly different from the italicized version that that was previously distributed. I won't have Mr. Stone repeat it unless somebody asks. Very well. All those in favor of the amendment, which would be added to the guidelines, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. If you just hold up your hands, because I know this is Mr. Norton, Mr. Stone, Ms. Tarkington, Mr. Walco, and Mr. Campbell. All those against? Mr. Raymer, Mr. Finger, Mr. Simon, Mr. Mason, Mr. Krummick, Ms. Martin, and Mr. Kelly. That fails 5-7, no abstentions. Okay. Any other amendments to the guidelines? Mr. Kelly.
We just mentioned how this is a communication piece to the public. And as I read the first sentence, I had some concerns about the use of the word enormous losses in the past few weeks and days. And I was unclear as to whether or not that meant the financial markets or the town of Greenwich. And I think that could be problematic as our opening sentence. And I would suggest that we just substitute in that first sentence, it would read, with the global financial markets in a state of high negative volatility, and take out everything that follows, and with enormous losses in the past few weeks and days, and then just continue the sentence with the preparation of the budget guidelines, blah, blah, blah. So what you're deleting is the word "and" to the word "days," and you're putting in a state of high negative volatility. And I think that clarifies it, so there's no misconception that Greenwich has not sustained enormous losses in the past few weeks and days. That would be my motion.
Mr. Chair,
Motion by Mr. Kelly. Is there a second?
I would second that motion.
Second by Mr. Raymer. Mr. Norton.
I don't think there's any such thing on the financial markets as negative volatility.
I tried to put the word negative in there.
So if
High
it,
volatility.
so it would simply be the deletion of the words "and with enormous losses in the past few weeks and days."
Yes.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
That's correct. And fine, that stays then. We won't go through the formality of amending it. So, any discussion as to Mr. Kelly's motion? Mr. Raymer.
I guess as a seconder, I'm supposed to speak.
No. You do not have to feel obligated to speak.
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
Well,
If you wish to.
I do endorse his concern that it's poor public relations to have that easily misunderstood clause in our opening sentence, and that was the reason for my second.
Thank you. Other discussions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Are there any other amendments to the guidelines?
Can I have,
Mr. Kelly?
I just have one clarification at page 6. In the last paragraph before the word capital, where it says it's the section on all town departments. And there is a sentence in there that reads as follows: the BET is aware that there are organizational, accountability, and personnel issues that must be resolved before this can be implemented, talking about shared services here between the BOE and the town, but wants to begin this process in FY10 with consolidation of town and BOE resources in one budget department. And it's just a question for the Budget Committee. Is there a concern that with these issues out there of organization, accountability, and personnel, that we are to some extent pushing them or micromanaging them to come up with a consolidated budget on the shared services for the building? Mr. Mason.
I would think the answer to that is simple. In all the discussions on shared services, you're going to find that, for instance, just as we talk shared services, say BOE versus the town, you're going to see there's different positions, which would require some changes, and some might have to be offered on behalf coming from the first selectman. I think that's what you're seeing there, taking that into consideration. As far as the one central thing, I think the thought there would simply be just putting the appropriations together, that's all. I think that's what you're seeing there as one of the mechanisms to look at how to do that from a starting point, that's all.
All right, okay. That's all we're doing at this stage with that. Okay. Can I have one other clarification?
Keep going.
And then I'll be done. The King Street Fire Station. We talk about the King Street Fire Station, but our last sentence there says the town must be careful. That's on page 6 too, the fourth bullet. The town must be careful not to create the illusion of safety by building one additional firehouse without first resolving fire department staffing across the town. Does this guideline indicate that we are going to have some discussion with respect to staffing of fire stations as we get into the discussion of a King Street firehouse? That's to Mr. Mason, just a question.
Very simple. As we all know, the King Street Firehouse started with an acquisition of land back when, with the intent that there was going to be gems and a firehouse there, career. As time has gone by, that's moved its way up in the capital, and it is actually was originally forecast for the upcoming budget. And I think what the guideline is saying there is, okay, we want to have a discussion. Was the old plan a good plan? Is that the current plan? I think you had some questions earlier tonight in relation to the Glenville rehab. I think that's exactly what we're saying. We will definitely
So
want.
we will have some questions.
We will have that conversation.
Great. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Any other amendments? First, I'll ask for amendments to the guidelines.
One more date that's wrong, which I'll fix, but we don't need to vote on that in attachment A for March 17th.
Why don't we at least get it on the record so that
Should say 09.
March 17th should be 09, okay? A couple lines up from the bottom, found on page 10, it says March of 08. It should be March of 09. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Other comments or questions then on the guidelines? Okay. They're being presented then. They were moved essentially and seconded by the Budget Committee, which requires no second, in a vote of 3-1-0. They've been amended slightly by Mr. Kelly's motion in the first line of the preamble. All those in favor of the guidelines signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Stone, abstentions. 11-1-0. Once again, I will commend the Budget Committee for all the work that they do and did over the course of the summer and in the past few months. I jokingly said to the BOC that one of the more prominent mistakes that I've made as chairman is to change the procedure by which we approve the budget guidelines from a 1-month process to a 2-month process. I must say, though, however, that I think the discussion was healthy and have a favorable impression from that standpoint of the process. How we do this next year, I think, remains to be seen. Maybe that's one of the items that we can take up after the budget process is over with in May and see whether or not we wish to continue this process the way it is or somehow change it. I would ask Finance if you could please have, because we're not yet capable or up and running of transmitting the budget guidelines electronically to all RTM members, what I would ask for are sufficient number of copies to be able to be distributed at the RTM meeting on next Monday evening. In all likelihood, we will be making, the BET will be making a presentation or at least comments relative to the sense of the meeting resolution, and at that point it might be the appropriate time to also mention our guidelines. But I would also ask Finance to make sure that an electronic copy does go out to all committee chairmen and district chairman, as well as the moderator, and a copy mailed to the moderator pro tem. Our last bit of business is the approval of the 2009 BET calendar that you have all received. Any changes? Mr. Kelly?
I presume we're supposed to look at these dates to see if we would have any problems with them as well, and advise the chair if we would have a problem.
Sure.
I would just note that May 18th is my daughter's graduation from college. I would not be present.
Okay.
And I don't know if we could move it to Tuesday, or that would be chaos, so.
Thank you for telling me now. Any other conflicts? Mr. Norton?
Are we planning to meet in August next year?
We always plan on it, and then...
Yeah, there is one other change. Roland has.
On June, I put it later than it should be, so the budget committee would meet June 9th, school BET would meet June 15th.
Okay.
Yes.
So far, we're traveling to Mr. Kelly's daughter's graduation. And that seems to be the only travel date. Yes, Ms. Barton.
I will be out of the country at the January meeting, but you may certainly go ahead without me.
Well, it depends where you are. If you're at a good enough location, maybe we'll join you. Any other comments? If you do, we'll then vote on these now, just so that we can start reserving rooms and things. If there is a change that needs to be made, if you just let me know sooner rather than later, that would be helpful so that we can make adjustments if necessary. So right now, I'm just going to ask everyone, with the only change is Mr. Geiger offered for this agenda in June. Can I have a motion to accept it? Mr. Raymer, Mr. Simon, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Any other business? Moved by Mr. Kelly, second by Mr. Raymer. We stand adjourned. Thank you.